Hey, hey, everybody! Thanks for tuning in to the Unleashed podcast. Unleashed with Brian Collins. My name is Greg Lal. I'm one of the hosts here. The other one is Chris Judson, who's going to be leaving us. Well, he's a producer, but he's also kind of if you had been here for our conversation just before we went live on the air, you would see that this is. Well, you would see a couple of things.
It's something.
You would see the wisdom of Chris Judson. I mean, it goes beyond being a producer. You can play 1 second of a rock song, and he knows what it is. Mostly. In the case of Brian, we're not even going to get into that. Brian, if you want to make I did a mea culpa last time we were together. You might want to consider that a mea culpa, an apology.
It's Latin for my fault.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know that.
It's a lawyer thing.
Yeah. So if you
and among educated people,
you want to
use it.
You want to say anything to the folks?
Because I said that if I even get 25% of what I said right, then I'm right. And I went and got my phone and I had 75% right.
That is some crazy math, Brian.
So what I was claiming was that Aerosmith sang a song to Steven Tyler from Aerosmith sang a song to his real life drop.
No, you didn't say a song. You named it. Name it. You said, go on. Well,
see, this is the whole crux of the matter about that. I got which song he sang was wrong.
What? Just name the song so the people can enjoy this.
Is it actually called Leaving on a Jet Plane? I don't actually know the real title.
No, you were right with the title, Leaving on a Jet Plane.
Which is in the movie. And it's not sung by the original artist. It's sung by, at the time, a contemporary artist who doesn't mean anything to me. And so Greg is on his high and mighty podium because he knows who the original artist is. But I was right that Aerosmith sang a song. I was right that Liv Tyler is in the movie. And that I was right that the song is in the movie. So
this is called obfuscation.
And I said if I got 25% of it right.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's actually one of my nom de webs. Well, I actually only have one nom de web. Do you know what a nom de web is?
I know what a nom de plume is.
Well, it's the same idea. It's just for the web.
No, I don't know what it is. What is
your screen name?
What is Chris's?
Prince.
He doesn't like
Prince B.
Prince B. And I don't have a nom de
web.
I don't have a nom de web.
Yeah.
What's yours?
Nidio obsificado.
Nidio?
Nidio is a Latin word that has apparently still used in Spanish, and it means like neat or clean. So it means something like clear, and then obfuscation means to confuse. So it like you could gloss it different ways of like. And when I explained
what you're doing is glossing over the fact that you made a major crazy mistake.
Well,
the
reason I picked
obfuscation.
The reason I picked
glossing it over.
It was that's not what gloss here means.
I know it doesn't. I'm using it like we use some verses in more than one way with more than one meaning.
The reason I came up with it is that I came across an article of like words that have gone extinct in English. And so those two were one of the words that were, so I was bringing them back.
Okay.
So obfuscate.
As you may have noticed, I'm a little wired. I've just come from Starbucks.
He's grumpy.
No, I'm not grumpy.
No, he is grumpy because he wanted to sing Chris a song, but he didn't know what branch Chris was going in.
Now this is what you should do. You should get right back at me.
This is the genesis of the whole conversation. And so I said he should sing "Leaving on a Jet Plane," which in my mind, I knew Steven Tyler and I knew Armageddon, and I didn't know about Peter, Paul, and Mary. Is that the band?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's any of their names.
Yeah. So basically, 2 + 2 = 25%. Oh, Chris, where are we here? Oh, let's hear the music and then we'll get into the podcast. He is flaming out, isn't he? What? He is going out with a flame.
Is that actually means? All right, you've done your 30 seconds. Cut it off.
Is straight percussion?
I'll explain. I'm going to explain for Greg because Greg doesn't know what dubstep is, and you were just treated to dubstep, and it was obviously not.
Is dubstep a genre, or is that the artist?
No, it's the genre. So you got these syncopated beats, and I don't know.
Yeah, but is that music?
Well, I mean that's a subjective question,
right.
But
anyway, I like.
But it is good choice. It is what record producers would call it music, and so in as much as it sells. And so there was a guy called Skrillex that kind of made it popular about 15 years ago. That was not Skrillex because he's not in the public domain. And I personally like Skrillex and dubstep, but I thought I need to explain because it was a little bit after Seth left the house. And so Seth may or may not like dubstep, but you would have no idea. So,
yeah.
And your grandkids aren't quite old enough yet. So
what are you doing?
I'm trying to adjust my mic.
So when we left you on the cliff last time, Brian refused to tell you what verse we were going to be looking at. The title of our series is "Everyone Thinks This Verse Means."
So I was very vindicated by our audience, and so some of them actually reached out to me in person over text and said it's obviously Jeremiah 29:11, and gold star to those people, and no stars for Chris because Chris didn't know what I was talking about.
His mind was on more important things.
Well, and Greg really did wear this on a wristband for 10 years.
When do I get to tell my story about that?
Now.
No, I want to sneak it in after you've made the case for this. So I'll tell the story in a bit.
What's my case? Why?
Well, I don't know. I'll be interested to hear your case. I think I know what your case is. About Jeremiah 29:11. You want to quote it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the problem with it is there's some words that like they can mean certain things and they can mean certain other ones. So I think it's usually rendered something like, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, to give you a future and to give you peace," or something like that. So
future and I hope is I think
majority. Yeah. But the word peace is that would be, how would that be? That would be rendered like restore or something. So the problem with most of those words is that like it's not inappropriate to translate them that way, but they're multivalent in as much as that, like, you know, the word shalom, if I had no context for the word, I would always gloss it as peace. But the reality is that like it's not peace in sort of the when you were a teenager, where peace is sort of like a negative kind of thing. It's like, peace, man, like, and you got a joint in your mouth and like you're just kind of protesting for the sake of protesting. But rather peace in the biblical sense is wholeness or wellness, or things are as they should be. And so like peace in kind of the American 60s lexicon just meant no war. But it didn't mean kind of anything else. But shalom in the biblical sense was like, you know, back to the Garden of Eden, back before sin entered the world. And so one of the things, so in the Leviticus we have the law, And there's 5 offerings that are instituted, and one of them is not mandated regularly, and it's the what we call the peace offering, and so it's voluntary by the supplicant, and they just want to give back to God. So and the idea is that like they just want to present. So it's related to the Thanksgiving offering, and it might even be the same thing. The problem with Leviticus is all these things have multiple names, and so it's hard for the reader to keep track of, what the heck offering you're talking about. But the other thing is like if someone steals from somebody else, or like someone's animal kills the other one's animal, they have to restore the thing. And so the word that we translate or gloss as restore is this word shalom. And so the idea is to make whole. And so there's an idea of completeness. And so depending on the context, it's going to be most certainly translated by the Greek word teleos. Whereas if you're talking about peace as opposed to war, then you're going to translate it with the word irene. And so there's probably some other glosses that I'm not thinking of.
A technical question, not really technical, but for last time we were together, you talked about hermeneutics and exegesis and so on. So when you have a verse like we're introducing now, what is the best way?
If you don't
let me just finish the question. Greek. Then, well, you can address that too. But what is the best way to approach the interpretation and understanding of a verse? Is it from the verse outward to contexts and history and so on, or the other way around? Or
yeah, I mean, the difficulty. I'm trying to think of how to answer the question. So, just in terms of my personal approach, it's just like a good thing that has been instituted in my life is I read through the Bible every year. And so like I just naturally sort of come upon things in their sort of native context. And so very seldom do I personally ever sort of look up a verse. So I that's probably not most believers' sort of experience. So for me, it's really the other way around of like, I'm just sort of discovering things in their sort of native context. And so like one of the things that C.S. Lewis talks about is and again, he's just speaking as a general layman here in sort of discovering like almost everything that Jesus said is really just a quotation from the Old Testament. So like even the most like outlandish or not outlandish, but countercultural of Jesus' saying is already in the Bible. And so, for example, like, if your enemy is hungry, like feed him, and by doing so, you'll heap burning coals on his head. Like to me, that would be a very original Dominical utterance, but it's not at all. It's in Proverbs. And so, like, as Lewis would say, that's axiomatic to hundreds of thousands of Bible readers, but because of our biblical illiteracy, we don't know that he's making these quotations. So it's what I'm not saying is Jesus didn't have original ideas because of human and their sinfulness, and then the accretions to the law. Like they certainly like added and like sort of either narrowed or expanded the point of the law that it wasn't recognizable, and so he had to peel away certain layers.
Okay, so I guess my question really relates to the average Christian who, as you started to say, does not know Greek or Hebrew, doesn't know the original language, and comes upon a verse that sounds puzzling to them, trying to understand it. Where would that person go? What tools should that person
So
have?
I think I can answer the question. I just was trying to get out the way that's not personally how my experience is. And so, and again, the difficulty for me is that like, I know that like life verses were a thing like when I was younger, let's say 20 years ago. And I know historically they've sort of been a thing. But the sort of the problem is that like it's so easy to Google things nowadays. And even the genuine Christian doesn't have to go like you used to have to go to the concordance in the back and say, what does God say about X? You know, so like if they're feeling sad, like they could look up verses that say hope or something like that, right? So you would go historically to the concordance, right. And again, it would be a very abbreviated concordance in the back of the Bible, and you would look up the word hope, and then it would give you certain passages that are true, like in general, and probably Jeremiah 29:11 would be there. I don't know, and so it all depends on like what a person is looking for. But nowadays, like ChatGPT is so good that you could type in, what does the Bible say about hope? And it'll give you an excellent answer. And it'll, its sources will be great. Like they'll be like really Bible believing evangelical Christians, and they'll have good answers.
Are you advocating for AI?
I'm not. I mean, again, well, yeah, for sure. So again, we had a whole episode on AI, and I don't know what I did or didn't come across. But like one of the things that I, following other thinkers like posited is that like assuming that the AI by again we're limiting the discussion here to large language model AI because that's what most people think when they think AI. Assuming that the data has been trained on the whole data set, by which I mean that there's not someone saying excluding the Bible or excluding Christian, because that does happen. Like, and by which I mean like the people were acting in bad faith because they were trying to push a particular agenda. And again, I'm not saying so that's sinful people interjecting their own sinful persuasions into the training of the model. So that's acting in bad faith. And then of course, then you also just have people who are sinful just writing stuff. But again, assuming that like the truth is going to win in the end, which is certainly true, like in as much as like you read Revelation and like the end is already written. So anyway, so the point is that assuming everything is fair in this sort of sense that I'm abstracting, then ChatGPT is no better and no worse than any other tool. Assuming everything is honest, right? And so, like, in as much as that, like, that there are people that publish Bibles in bad faith, by which I mean there's been publishings of the Bible that are jokingly called the Queen James translation, by which they take the King James Bible and they take out all references to homosexuality as being a sin or being condemned or whatever. So that's acting in bad faith. There's another like sort of one that's also, in my opinion, acting in bad faith, which was called the Green Bible, where they highlighted anything to do with nature and ecology or whatever, as if that in itself like is a great thing. And so like I haven't heard anything about green in 15 years.
Red Letter Bible is maybe in a different category.
No, Red Letter Bible, because that's trying to say these are the words of Jesus, and that's good. I think the only difficulty is that like it's, in my opinion, it's hard to tell when is it Jesus talking. And I've given the example in John 3, where it's very hard to tell, in my opinion, when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, where does the quotation end? Does it end at verse 15 or does it continue through verse 35? And the reality is that like the oldest Greek manuscripts had zero punctuation or any diacritical marks at all. But even the ones later, they don't have quotation marks. So there's other ways that you have to tell.
All right. I don't want to lead us to get too stuck stuck here so that we for a second time in a row don't get to the verse. But here's my concern, and you address it right now, because my concern is that if we're talking to people who want to be Bereans, who would hear Paul and Silas preach, and then they would go and search the scriptures. Of course, they didn't have the New Testament. They had the Old Testament to see if those things were so. They didn't have tools. And now we're into AI, commentaries online and so on. So, and I'm thinking too of our ministry at the church, the women's ministry especially, that teach the women inductive Bible study. And I would guess they're not in favor of study Bibles, but they want them to do the work. But it seems like we've come to the point where there are so many resources like AI and others that we're getting lazy.
Yeah, and like I said, I was there a question there, or was that just a statement?
That's kind of a statement. But the concern is that, what happened to the hard work that you've talked about? You've explained about hermeneutics and interpretation and context and historical, aspects that help us to understand.
Like I said, I acknowledge that most people aren't going to learn Greek and Hebrew. So and that's where a lot of my personal energy has gone into. So it's difficult for me to kind of answer that question. One thing I will say is that all good commentaries are going to spend a lot of time doing the work on the languages anyway. And so one of the things that in sermon prep, if you do not have the language ability, then you sort of waste a lot of time.
How so?
Well, because you have to read 20 commentaries, whereas if you knew the original language, then you wouldn't have to.
Unless you have a John Piper commentary, in which case you only need to read one. I'm being facetious.
Yeah, you darn well better admit that. I mean, I personally like John Piper a lot, but he would be the first to say, and he does say this often, that the words of Piper are weak and pale in comparison to the words of Scripture. So again, at the end of the day, I don't know a way around. You just got to start reading your Bible. So and the other thing is that I didn't have all this stuff beamed into my head. So what I mean is that I'm at age 18, which happens to be 20 years ago this year, I made a conscious decision to do several things. It was I'm going to make the faith that was legitimately mine as a teenager, but I'm going to make it an adult faith. And so I'm not going to stay stuck as my peers may or may not have done. And I'm also going to start reading my Bible seriously. So I asked for a study Bible, and you don't need to do that, but I did do it, and I did read all the notes that came with it. And so it really helped. And so I ended up getting, the equivalent of, an OT and NT survey just by reading the notes in my Bible. So if you're not familiar with these terms, these are the first classes that you take when you go to seminary. You have to take Old Testament survey and New Testament survey, and they're usually a semester, sometimes 2 semesters, and it just tries to put in context the entire Bible.
Yeah.
And and then the next class that you would take after that would be something like systematic theology. And that sounds scary, but all it means is that putting theology, by which we mean the study of God, into sort of categories that we're used to. So organizational categories. And then you can further break them down into theology proper, by which would mean the study of God the Father, and then, Christology, the study of Christ, pneumatology, the study of the Spirit, harmatology, the study of sin, soteriology, the study of salvation, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course there's subcategories within that of biblical theology, by which one means to and again, there's sort of like a tension between being a systematic theologian who like tries to look at the whole Bible and also what is known about Scripture, about the nature of God from special and general revelation. And again, these are all technical terms, and they all sound scary. But again, like I was exposed to these things from the age of a small child, and so just anecdotally, there's a great saint in our church, George Lissette, and I think he shared this publicly at Men's Breakfast, and he talks about when he went to college, and I think he went to Wheaton, and he took a systematic theology class or a survey class, and the kid next to him like never took any notes, and George is scribbling furiously. He's like, how do you know all this stuff? He said, well, I was a pastor's kid, like I grew up with it. So and so like so again, if I knew nothing about the Bible, I could see it being very daunting. But luckily, I went to Sunday school, and it's amazing how much you learn. Just
Yeah, let me weigh in, and then we'll get to the verse. And you laid as a baseline, and I think that's exactly the place to start. Is read your Bible. That's the baseline. Together, I would add to that community.
Yeah.
The community of the church, where you're with others who are further along than you are. Like I hang around with you, you're way further along with original languages and so on. So you hang around with those people in the context of the church, and then all of the other stuff, AI.
And I think the other thing is, and again, I realize that this is somewhat unique to me. But I've always been the one that has not been afraid to ask a question and look stupid for asking a question. Because how else do you learn anything? And the other thing, and this, I went through secular public schools, but it's probably true at Christian schools too, is the general sort of truism that ask the question because you're not the only one who has it. And so, the temptation for me was to often ask questions in such a way that there was no doubt I really knew the answer. And I hope those days are long behind me. And so nowadays that I ask a question because I genuinely want to know the answer, or I'm trying to ask a question in such a way to help other people see, in sort of a Socratic kind of way of like asking the question in such a way as like, this is something that I wrestled with. So like if I'm in a small group setting, like Bible study or my small group, sometimes I'll ask the question in a Socratic way to get people to try it.
I think all of that is helpful, but let's get to it. I want to know why you chose this particular verse, Jeremiah 29:11. For this series.
Well, so the reason I chose it is probably obvious, is because how it is misused by a particular group of people that at the top are deceivers.
This is the perfect point for my story, and you can use me as one of those people who maybe has misused it. So, in a church I pastored, we had a theme every year, and I chose as kind of a pointer Jeremiah 29:11. That was kind of our theme, the future that God has for us. And we printed out these wristbands, these rubber wristbands with Jeremiah 29:11 on it. And I wore it on my wrist probably for 5 years. It was only a 1-year theme, and I just left it on. And every once in a while, I look at it and he has a future and a hope for you. He knows, he has a plan, and so on. So that was the way I interpreted it. About a year ago, there was a woman in our church who was seriously ill at the time. She recovered, but it was it was maybe 2-3 years ago, because it was COVID. She had COVID, and she was compromised to begin with. So I went to visit her, and she was fearing that her life was short. And the doctors had told her, prepare. So anyway, I took the wristband off and I gave it to her and had her wear it as a reminder that, these are the plans I have for you for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope, so that she could maybe be thinking forward instead of at the end of her life. And fortunately, she recovered. I don't even know if she ever wore the wristband. But so anyway, that's the significance it had for me. Take it from there.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is that I always want to. What was that quote you had from Piper? I mean, the gist of it was like you want to be honest, right? Like you want to be intellectually honest. That was it. Do you remember you quoted Piper last week? Well, I mean, last time we talked.
I don't remember.
Well, anyway, you did, and that was sort of the gist of it. And so like I said, the problem that I have is like there's always flavors of so that the same famous quote from what we call the book of Ecclesiastes, which just means the guy that assembles the people together, and then by extension he then gives a message, and so the Hebrew title is Koheleth, and so like I said, the word kahal means to gather. So we often render the word Kohelet as preacher, and that's not inappropriate. But anyway, and it's whoever the author was, whether it was Solomon or not, adopts a persona as if he's Solomon, and so he's talking, as like I said, as if he was Solomon, and so he, the guy was. I mean, he had 666 talents of gold coming in every year. And so if you do the math, and gold is one of the few things that's kept its value. So you could do the math, and it's, 70 pounds to a talent. And so he's basically got $1 billion. I could be corrected about the actual numbers here, but every year he's got that amount of gold coming in, and there's peace between all the nations, and it's the golden age of Israel, and so he's sending ships out. They're bringing back baboons and apes and everything, and the point is, and whether this is really Solomon talking or this is a later Israelite who's reflecting back on what it would have been like, is that like as long as there's still sin in the world, there's a futility to life. And so the word that the King James translates as vanity and the NIV is meaningless, which translation I was brought up, hevel, it literally means smoke. And so it means something like ethereal or vapor, or the Bible Project guys say it's a mystery, it's an enigma. And so there's that old line from the Twilight show. It's, how did it go? It's like, it's a mystery wrapped in an enigma. And do you remember the? You do, but you don't remember the quote. Yeah. So anyway, so the point is that like the opening lines is Hevel Hevelim, which is like, and so again, the old King James, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. The point that the Kohelet, the preacher, is making is that like at the end of the thing, everything is the second law of thermodynamics is that everything, the entropy increases, like, or like you're all gonna the timeline, to quote Fight Club, the timeline of on an infinite timeline, everybody's probability of death goes to zero. Like in 200 years, no one's going to remember who you are. Like once your kids are dead, no one's, et cetera, et cetera. And so you start to say what does or does not have value, and all the things that people usually assign value, are material prosperity, happiness, what these sorts of things. And I know you've given me a long leash here, so I'm trying to wrap it in. So anyway, the point is that this is sort of what the Greeks called hedonism. It's not exactly 1-to-1, but it's sort of like eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die would sort of be the summary of the hedonistic doctrine. And so people that proclaimed to be Christians, and I won't name names, but there was a church in Texas that was the most famous. And there was Texas Monthly said on the 8th day this pastor was created. And I haven't heard about him in a while, but he was very popular back in the day. They had like 100,000 members, and he was the king of what other true Christians called the prosperity gospel. And it basically says, like, God wants you to have the American dream.
Why aren't you naming names? What's wrong?
Because I don't need to.
Okay. So you're not going to say Joel Osteen. You're not even going to. That's fine. I respect that. I don't respect him, but I respect you, Brian. Go ahead. Oh, God. By the way, just a reminder, there is no leash. There is no leash here. This is the Unleashed podcast. All I do is interrupt you when I feel like,
Yeah, or you look at me funny.
And I'm looking at you funny right now because I'm wondering how this.
Anyway, so the point is this verse is perfect for the prosperity gospel because it's in the Bible, and if one doesn't interpret it in context, then it perfectly fits the American dream. And because if you don't have a context for this verse, then a future can mean whatever you want.
Can this is a perfect time for me to read Calvin. Can I?
Yeah.
It's okay.
This is the Institute.
Calvin, commenting on this verse, he says, "This then is the reason why the prophet now speaks, Jeremiah, so largely of their future redemption. It was difficult to persuade the Jews, for as they thought that they would soon return to their own country, they could not endure delay, nor exercise the patience which God commanded. They were at the same time, as we have said, quite confident, inasmuch as the false prophets filled their minds with vain hopes. He therefore says, I know the thoughts which I think toward you." Some think that God claims here as what peculiarly belongs to him, the foreknowledge of future things. But this is foreign to the prophet's meaning. There is here, on the contrary, an implied contrast between the certain counsel of God and the vain imaginations in which the Jews indulge themselves. So Calvin is basically saying it's the very opposite of the prosperity gospel.
Yeah, of course, but but again, I think why it's so easy to pick on this verse is that like the immediate context of the verse, by which I mean you don't even have to read the whole book of Jeremiah. You can just read this chapter and the previous several verses to get the context, and it can't mean what
you're going to give the context.
Yeah, for sure. So the immediate context is well, I got to back up a little bit, but the Jews, and I can say Jews safely here because it's just the southern tribe at this point. So it's the descendants of Judah, which we get the name Jew ultimately from, and so it doesn't include the 10 northern tribes. They've long since been erased off the map, and so all you have left is the southern kingdom. And so for hundreds of years, the southern kingdom has had good kings and bad kings, and it's like there'll be one good king and then there'll be one bad king, or there'll be one good king and then 3 bad kings. And so the good kings will sometimes follow God faithfully at the beginning, and then they'll apostatize at the end. And then sometimes they'll start off really bad, like the worst of them all was Manasseh, and it does seem like he repented at the end of his life. And so, so you read about this in the Kings, which has one perspective, and then you have the chronicler's perspective, which is post-exile, after they come back from exile. So anyway, so the immediate context is God has given the Jews many chances to repent, and from the leadership who should have known better, the kings and the priests, etc., and the people themselves, seeking after false gods for their own prosperity. And sometimes it seems to pay off, in as much as that, like, sometimes there's a bad king and there is prosperity. And so you see that sort of tension throughout the book of Jeremiah. But no matter what, you have in the immediate context of Jeremiah 29, Jeremiah is specifically commanded by God, write a letter to the Jews who are in exile in Babylon. So at this point, Jeremiah is still in Jerusalem. The temple is still standing, and Nebuchadnezzar, who is just called Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, but historians call him Nebuchadnezzar II, and he founded the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Anyway, he's well known outside the Bible because we've dug up his stuff. So he was known from the Greek sources as well. So he's well known everywhere. Anyway, what empires used to do is they would take the best and brightest back to the hometown, and then they would train them up in the ways of the people, and then they would send them back as diplomats. And because they were ethnically and culturally from this place, but they were educated over here, they were sort of half and half, and so they were set up as to be the rulers back here. And so Daniel and his three friends, who we only know from their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their original names being Hananiah. I don't know. I don't remember. Anyway, they were given these Babylonian gods names. We do know Daniel, which means God is my judge, but his Babylonian name was Belteshazzar, which means something like Bel has something or other. Anyway, the British Empire used to do this, and in some sense they still do, even though they're not an empire. Still, like the best and brightest still go to Britain to be educated in the former colonies like India and Pakistan, and then they go back. Anyway, the point is that the Jews have been sent into exile, and right now everything's kind of up in the air. Like, you still kind of have a Jewish king ruling, and so, like, what would happen is, like, Nebuchadnezzar came in, he killed the previous king, and then he installed one of his sons as a puppet king. Then Egypt would come in, they would kill that king, and then they would install somebody else from the royal household as a puppet king. And then there was this back and forth. And then eventually Nebuchadnezzar comes in, kills off all the family of the last king. I think he was renamed Zedekiah. And then blinds him and then kills him. And then he installs his own governor, Gedaliah. But this is before all this. And so anyway, so you have some Jews have been taken into captivity, but you have all the false prophets who are still back in Jerusalem, who are saying, oh, Nebuchadnezzar's going to fall. All we need to do is team up with Egypt, and like Egypt will come in and wipe out the Babylonians, which historically, like, was true, that the Egyptians were able to defeat the Babylonians. But they were eventually decisively defeated at what we call the Battle of Carchemish. But this is yet to happen, I think. And so anyway, so it's plausible that these people are gonna come home. But God is saying very clearly to the people, just earlier in chapter 20 to Jeremiah, write to these people, you're not coming home. You're going to die there. And so like, because you're going to be there a long time, like, settle in, like, build houses, like, give your children away in marriages, like,
for 70 years anyway.
Yeah, for 70 years. And so the point is that if you're an adult and you're going into exile, or you're already in exile, you're going to die in Babylon. You're not coming back. There were some people. So in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, there were some people who presumably were children who come back, and they they remember the temple, and the temple gets destroyed in this mess. Yeah. And then the temple is kind of rebuilt, and they weep because they remember the glory of the old temple. So there were some people that came back, but for the most part, all the adults most certainly died. And even the most holy of them, like Daniel never came back. He stayed in Babylon. So God is saying, I'm going to prosper you, but it's not going to be in the Holy Land. You're going to prosper in Babylon. You're going to prosper.
But then you're going home. So there was
some of you are going home.
Well, okay. So verse 8, do not let your prophets and your diviners who are among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams they dream, for it's a lie that they're prophesying to you in my name. I did not send them, declares the Lord. So, and then turns around in verse 10, for thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you. I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place.
Sure, but that only makes sense when you look at like Israel or Judah as a whole, not as an individual, which is so counter to our American individualistic Christianity, right? So,
and this verse is very often used I used it.
Yeah, as an individualistic,
as an individual encouragement.
Yeah. And again, it's true for Judah in general, but it's not true for the individual.
It's not.
No.
All right. Last time, I thought you were very, very gracious in the way you cut slack to people about the application.
Well, because
of truth.
because the reality,
and it doesn't sound like you're very gracious today, Brian.
So here's how one has to look at things, is that it's true, but it may not mean what you think it means. You know what I mean? And so inasmuch as that, if you're a true believer, eventually, by which I mean at the end of time, however long that is, we're not told. Even Jesus said the Son of Man does not know, only the Father knows, when he's coming back. So it could be in 2 minutes, it could be in 2,000 years. We just don't know. And so eventually Jesus is coming back in full glory. So again, I don't want to get caught up into questions of whether he comes back twice, by which I mean the rapture, because it's irrelevant to my point, because eventually there's going to be the new heavens and the new earth, and we're going to be with Jesus. And so, and Paul talks about this, when you're looking back retrospectively, you're going to say it was all worth it. But what you're not going to do is say, I had an idea of what it looked like, and it may look that way or it may not have.
Right.
And so the reality is that Jesus himself tells us, in this world you will not, or you will have trouble, but fear not, for I have overcome the world.
Okay.
And so the reality is that this verse can mean everything you think it means if you don't mean in this life.
Okay, this verse literally means that you sit tight for 70 years and I will visit you. So there is a time frame. I'm putting myself out here. I'm going to come back to my wristband and so on, and how I used it to encourage this woman. And you tell me what you think, because it was true for these captives that they would be captive for a time, but restoration was coming.
But not.
Well, let me finish. As it was true for this woman who was captive of COVID, not a stretch. She was captive of COVID and possibly death, and was reminded of God's promise of hope.
And so,
life. Not with a timeline necessarily.
So to which I say, what about Grant?
Well, you just answered that question. Grant, we're referring to the young man who passed away.
Right. So it can't mean it in the sense that you mean it. It has to mean at the end of time.
Oh, I don't think that's what I said. It can mean the end of time. It can mean ultimate hope and a future in heaven, as it did for Grant, or it could mean.
But how can you say that when you don't know? That's my point.
Well, you can use the words hope and a future with the understanding that for the Christian could mean near term, far term, life, and the next life.
Well, and this is, I think this is one of those things that I may need to stay out of, in as much as like we're getting into the realm of this is what the Bible said versus like how do you communicate that in a pastoral way.
And that's what I'm pushing toward.
So
I understand what you're saying.
So like, and C.S. Lewis would stay out of that debate depending on the issue. So for example, he refused to talk about birth control because he wasn't a woman, he wasn't a married man, and he wasn't in a pastoral office.
Yeah, so, well, that's I understand that.
You know what I mean?
Know what you mean.
But
that's
again,
not the same thing as the principle for the Christian of hope and God's plan for you having a future.
Yes, but again, and again, this is maybe this is just my own baggage, but what I was promised implicitly by the church growing up is if you follow all our rules, then you will be given the American dream. Here's your proof text.
Do you listen to Joel Osteen growing up?
No.
Oh, all right.
But my church certainly believed that kind of thing. So, I mean, we came out of Rick Warren, who's not exactly prosperity gospel, but he's not exactly not prosperity gospel either.
In between.
Yeah. So like, so there was the purpose-driven life, which it's only one step to whatever Joel Osteen's book was.
So you're going to
So again, like I said, what I want to say,
I'm not comfortable staying away from the application.
Well, again, what I want to say is that like God does have a hope and a future for you, but it may not be what you think it should look like.
Okay.
And so, like I said, you look at somebody like Joni Mitchell. Does she pronounce it? Johnny, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Johnny.
Not Johnny Mitchell. Johnny, well, her name is Tata, her married name. But Johnny. People will know what you're talking about. Johnny
Erickson?
Mitchell.
Erickson?
Joni Mitchell is a...
Erickson?
Yes.
Erickson Tata. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I don't know who Johnny Mitchell is. So.
Joni Mitchell's a great vocalist.
Okay.
From my era.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway,
I meant Johnny Erickson Tata. So
we knew what you meant, Brian.
Yeah. So she must be around your age.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So we've talked about her before. And she, when she was about 15, she dived headfirst and into some kind of shallow body of water and was paralyzed from the neck below. And this was the late 60s. And there was a movie made about her life, and in the late 70s that I watched as a teenager, and I found it. I only watched it the one time, and it's something my grandmother got me, and I found it very moving. And it's her wrestling with, she had all these plans. She was 17. She loved Jesus, and she had a vision of how her life was going to look. And instead, she's now she's a quadriplegic, and she's, what are you going to do with her life? And so one thing that she did was she was just alone for much of the time. So the only person that she could talk to was Jesus. And she eventually started drawing by holding the pencil in her mouth. And she entered art contests and wouldn't say that this was a quadriplegic who had drawn this, because she wanted it to be judged on its own artistic message, own artistic merits. And because she was severely handicapped, she was able to be a voice for people who were handicapped. And God used that to for her. And I think, and she now has a organization called Johnny and Friends. And I don't know much about the organization. But she, several years ago, and again, I didn't hear her say this directly, but John Piper quoting her says that when she gets to heaven, she wants to have her wheelchair just for a minute. And she wants to say to God, even though that she can walk, she can say, that wheelchair gave me a whole lot of trouble, but I want to thank you because I'd rather know you with the wheelchair than to not know you without the wheelchair.
Yeah, a somewhat modern version of Johnny's story is Nick Vujicic. Ever hear of him?
Is he the abortion failure guy?
Wait a minute.
Where they cut off?
I was muted.
They cut off all his arms and legs,
well,
and he survived.
He was born with no arms and like two
He's
little
got
feet,
some
no
stubs.
legs.
Yeah, I've seen him speak.
Quadriplegic.
Well, kind of.
Yeah, and he almost committed suicide when he was like 10. Lived through his teen years, battling his situation, and then accepted the Lord when he was 15, and has had a worldwide ministry going around. He's recently, there's a new movie out that's coming out next week called Life to the Limit, Living Life to the Limit, something like that, about his story. And anyway.
So my point is simply that like one of the things in the movie, like this was in the late 60s, and so they didn't have any therapy for Johnny, and so they would just have her her face was in this little hole, and then the nurse would flip her over, and she would just be stuck like that for hours and hours. And so it reminds one of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, of just and so it's strictly speaking, it's not torture, but I don't know how else to describe it. But God used that circumstance, and so like, was it true that God had a future for her? Yeah, but it wasn't the future she thought it was going to be. Right. So that's why I'm so cautious to say, like, yes, it's true that applies to all believers, that there really is a hope in Jesus, but like, it doesn't mean that you're going to get, the 2.5 kids and the white picket fence. You know what I mean? And I think for my generation, that was what we were promised. For your generation, it was actually achievable. And then your generation flushed it down the toilet for my generation, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it sure is.
So I'm not accusing you personally, but I am accusing your generation.
Well, then that's very. I take that very personally.
Do you really?
Not really.
Yeah, I didn't think
Not
so.
really.
So, I mean, we've talked about that off the air before.
Well, I just want to leave. It's not time to leave, but when we do leave, I'd like to leave people with a sense of where they go with this particular verse, and that also going forward with the other verses. Well,
can I interject? Because I think anyone that has the Holy Spirit and has a reasonable understanding of what Jesus calls the actual Christian to is that there is going to be suffering.
Yep.
But there is joy in this life and beyond. And so one of the thought experiments that helps me is like, would I still be a Christian even if there weren't heaven? And the answer I come to is yes, because it's, even though there's trials in this life, there is also hope and peace in this life. And so, we're not those without hope and peace. And so, and again, coupled with that is the hope for a future in heaven, like whatever that means. But there is a sense of peace that comes with it, that those that don't know what's coming for them just don't have. And so we can ignore the question when we're feeling well, and if we're not feeling well, we can use alcohol or other substances to drown it out. But at the end of the day, when you're alone, and contemplating realities, like you don't have an answer if you don't have Jesus. And there's just anecdotally, there's a piece that I have that others don't have.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought experiment.
You've never thought of it that way.
I had never thought of it that way. I think of Paul's words, that are always repeated at funerals. We do not grieve as others who have no hope. Yeah. And of course, our ultimate hope is heaven. But if there were no heaven, it is true that two people, if there were no heaven, in the same set of circumstances, can view those circumstances in themselves very, very differently. Well, so to an extent, it's how you choose to view your circumstances.
And what I don't want to say is you just need an attitude correct, because that's not at all what I'm talking about.
Right. Yep.
Because like there were Old Testament saints, and we talk about in Hebrews. I mean we unofficially call it the Hall of Fame of Faith, right, in Hebrews 11, where the author of Hebrews is recounting the great saints, some of whom we would not consider saints, but nonetheless they're in there. So Samson being the prototypical example, and one of my professors explained it to me. He said because he's not there for anything he did, but he's typologically a Christ, so that's why he's in there. So he himself almost did nothing right, but he typologically represents Christ. I'm not going to get into what a typology is. That could be another thing. So if you know what I'm talking about, great. If you don't, who cares? I throw out technical terminology all the time. So, but the author of Hebrews, talks about people that just experienced terrible things. And, like it says they were sawn in half, they wandered, naked. And so he's making allusions to Isaiah and Jeremiah that Isaiah probably wasn't sawn in half, but there was literature written about him that Manasseh sawed him in half. And so in the medieval art and at the time of the author of Hebrews, that's who it's talking about. But in either case, there certainly were people sawn in half, so it doesn't matter whether it was Isaiah sawn in half or not. But the point is these people were looking forward to a future. They didn't know what that was going to look like, but they knew that, like Abraham had almost no picture of what God's restoration of humanity was going to look like, but yet he still believed God, and that in some sense, through him and his descendants, well, actually through his seed, because Paul makes that point that it's not to the seeds, but it's to the seed, singular, which is Jesus. All nations are blessed. So yes, the world is blessed through Abraham's all his descendants, broadly speaking, but specifically through Christ.
Yeah. So I think there are two dangers with every one of these verses we're going to be looking at, including this one. One danger is that we take hope and future, we take it and we just apply it in different ways without understanding the context, the limitations, the qualifications that you've talked about. The other danger is that we decide we're going to just isolate those verses, put them in a box in Jeremiah chapter 29. It means what it does there based on the context, and we're not going to try to apply it, even though there is truth to the fact that God has a plan for us, a future and a hope. So somewhere in between.
So a good exercise. And again, I don't know that every single Bible verse has an application. And Judas hanged himself. Does that have an application?
You hear about the guy that?
This is going to be some bad joke. I need to learn.
Did you hear about the guy who?
Stop. Let me finish my point, and then you can talk.
Okay.
One could play the game of it would sort of be like what's the game? the Ouija board where you kind of move it around. So one can play the game where you flip through, and I've known people that have done this, and sometimes God works in it, sometimes he doesn't, where they just open their Bible and say, God, if you're there, and then they put their finger down on the verse. Yeah. And so, like if you were very unlucky, or if God was laughing at you, he would send you to the place, and Judas hanged himself, and then Jesus saying, go and do likewise.
Exactly.
So, like, I don't believe that anybody has ever actually done that, but that is sort of the classic case of the dangers of doing this sort of picking and choosing of immediately jumping to application. And so I do think Jeremiah 29 does have application for the Christian, but it needs to be properly reinterpreted in light of the gospel and what Jesus actually promised. And that was what I was starting to say earlier. And so it would be a very good exercise for the Christian that has found comfort in Jeremiah 29:11 if they listen to this podcast and they say, okay, I may have misunderstood what this meant, but what does it actually mean in light of the hope of Jesus? And what can I and what can I not say that I'm promised? And so sometimes God gives us overabundance and really does give us the American dream. I'm not saying he doesn't, but that's not really what your hope is in. Like, because again, as Tara Lee Kopp, and she may be quoting somebody else, is that we care more for the gifts than we do the giver. And
I think it comes back to the two things, one of which you mentioned, one of which I mentioned, which is that read your Bibles, be a Berean, check to see exactly what the verse means, do your work, and the other is be in community so that you can go to someone if you're not, someone like you who would say, what about Grant?
Yeah.
When I or someone was trying to suggest that, when you're sick, God will heal you if you just have enough faith. We know that's not true, but we need people in our lives who can,
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, it was true in Grant's sense. In Grant's case,
right?
But it wasn't the way that he, or more importantly, his parents and remaining brothers and other people that loved him thought it was going to look like. And I'm happy to report. I wanted to be there, but I wasn't there, and I may have mentioned this last time. But you guys weren't going to be there at all. But there was a remembrance or celebration of life at PCA, and 1,000 people showed up, and I don't know how many of them were believers, but like that's a much greater impact than he probably would have had.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise.
And they talked. I don't know if they did in that service, but in an earlier funeral service, a smaller one we went to, they talked about Joe, one of our pastors, got up and talked about the impact that he had on the whole league that he was part of. Yeah, you heard about that, and how they dedicated.
That was
something
his
to
brother,
him.
His brother's league.
But Grant was.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But his reach.
Yeah, he had more reach in his death.
Yeah.
Than he did in his life. And again, like that's his story. So one of the things that C.S. Lewis says in the words of Aslan, the Christ figure in the fictional planet of Narnia, I never tell you somebody else's story. You only get to know your own story. And whether the somebody else tells you their story, that's their business. But Jesus never tells you somebody else's story. He only tells you your own story.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we get to witness that, as we did in Grant. But like we shouldn't look at, say, what happened to Grant is normative for all Christian. Well, no, it's normative for Grant, and somebody else has a different story. You know what I mean? And so there are just as many people who God has healed, and I happen to know some of them. So when we get to heaven, we may be told the reasons why, but in the second ending of John, and John, what we call chapter 21, like it's, Jesus is telling Peter how Peter's going to die. and he's saying, when you're old, people are going to lead you away to a place you don't want to go, and that's how you're going to glorify. And so he's obviously alluding, and we know from church history that Peter was crucified for his faith, and he asked to be crucified upside down, and the other apostle is, and Peter says, well, what about him? And Jesus is like, that's none of your business. And if
John,
because that he said, what is that to you? Follow thou me. In other words, like that's if I want him to remain alive, that's my business. That's not your business. Yeah. That's between he and I, not you and I.
That's a good example of the way to treat this verse.
Yeah.
And thinking about this today led me to another verse, which maybe we should use it as a spinoff next time, or maybe not. Your choice. Nehemiah 8:10, the joy of the Lord is your strength. That has its own context, what that was said and why it was said to the people who were weeping when the law was read to them.
Oh,
and the Levites came alongside and said, no, what are you doing? Stop your crying.
Oh, because they were, because it was on Sukkot, so they weren't supposed to be weeping on Sukkot. So I just read it. I had to think of what the context was.
But that wouldn't stop me from reminding people, hey, the joy of the Lord is your strength. But we can save that for another time.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that one.
Yeah. I think we're done here.
Yeah. So one sad
stuff.
Well, one sad thing is we alluded to many times. Chris is going to boot camp. He leaves tomorrow, and he's going to Missouri.
Now wait a minute.
And then he's going to training in Texas. He's going to be a firefighter. He will be back eventually.
All right. Now you just slipped this word in. I'm sure you didn't think about it much, but it kind of relates to what we've been talking about. Is it a sad thing that Chris is leaving for boot camp? Or is it part of God's plan for the future?
For me, it's sad because it means I have to do the work of the producer, which I don't want to do. Yeah. So that's why. So it all depends on your perspective. So.
I'm a little sad too.
Yeah. So I mean, Greg and I are excited for Chris. So we're happy. We're happy for him, but we're gonna miss him in the meantime. And certainly miss his services. He's not a part of the podcast on the front end, on the part that you guys see and listen to, and we haven't given him a mic, nor do I think he really wants one. But he certainly has made our lives a lot easier. So
yes, he has. I wonder, Chris, this is just off the top of my head thought. You think the military would allow you just virtually to do this? Like it's only once every couple weeks.
Well, not during boot camp for sure.
Yeah, that was actually a facetious question.
Well, no,
I don't think the military would allow. No,
I mean in AIT he may actually have some free time, but
temporary leave.
No.
AIT on leave, you could do it right there.
Well, yeah, but I'm not talking about on leave.
Okay,
AIT is the training. The Army's got acronyms for everything that Chris is learning. He was learning the acronyms.
What's your favorite acronym so far that you've picked up? You have a favorite?
KISS.
Is that a real acronym?
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, but that's not an Army only acronym.
Yeah, that's definitely not.
That's a general acronym.
Yeah.
Were you in sales? I can't remember.
I was.
Yeah. Did they use that back then?
Yeah, probably. Probably.
Did they use the Peter principle? You know the Peter principle?
Refresh my memory.
You rise to the level of your incompetency.
Yeah. No, I don't remember that. Yeah. But KISS, yeah. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, I learned it from The Office, but I think it's a real phrase in sales. So,
yeah.
Yes, it is a real phrase in sales.
I don't think of it as a phrase in sales.
You just think of it in general.
I was in sales for 7 years, but it certainly applies in sales, but I think it's more general.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, Brian. I think that was really useful. Useful to me. I think it'll be useful for everybody that heard it. And Chris, send us away with that
dubstep.
Yeah. What is the percussion that they do with their lips? I can't do it. Beatboxing, yeah. That's not what this is. Which really begs the question: is this music? But I know.
We talked about that question about like if someone is playing an 808, like, so for example, like the drum kit we have at church is hybrid, right? So it's like it's not actually a drum, but it has real drum sounds in there, and it also takes into account how hard you hit the thing. So it's sort of a hybrid system. So I don't think most musicians would say that is not a real drum set, and the sounds that you, and I think even most musicians would say that if you can't, and again, C.S. Lewis talks about this, is like that, like if you can't tell what is the copy from the original, like how do you know what, and so where songs are now generated by AI, and like if people enjoy them and get the same aesthetic experience that they would from a real song, what's the difference?
Yeah, well,
if they don't know.
I'm a little bit of a Neanderthal when it comes to judging music.
I get it.
Because as an acoustic guitar player, along with Terry, I'm like, really?
Electrify it? Well, again, I get it, but even most acoustic guitars have a piezoelectric pickup, right? So
wow, I know that's like playing pickleball, adapting a tennis court to a pickleball court.
You are in favor or
not?
I'm
very judging.
Or not in favor?
Not in favor of pickleball.
I think you're the only
if you
one.
Can't play tennis, which I can't.
I think you're the only one of your generation with that opinion.
Well,
pickleball.
My own generation.
Pickleball is extremely popular.
Oh, I know.
Among your generation.
That's right. Because they can't get around.
Yeah, they can't.
They have their little paddles.
Yeah.
But
one of my clients put in a $40,000 pickleball court. Well, I mean, he had to have someone come, chop down all the trees, take them out, grade it, bring in the stone, and then he had someone come in and pave it, and it came out to $40,000.
All of his 70 and 80-year-old friends come over.
Well,
with their paddles.
Well, he's in his 70s.
Yeah, I know.
And they all live on the lake, and so everybody from the lake all just goes over to his house, the pickleball court.
Yeah, I judge them. I totally judge them.
I don't think. I mean, on my way to work in Acton, there's tennis courts, but I don't think people out there are actually playing tennis. I think they're all playing pickleball.
Oh, there's a new place in Dover that has pickleball and training. I can't remember what was there before. It's in the Hannaford place.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, because Greg wants to use the space for his karate thing.
Greg
Lazarus, because he lives right next door. There's a little side road right there.
That's right.
So
that's right, yeah.
So that'd be